When economist Javier Milei won Argentina's presidential election in 2023, international media framed his victory in the context of a rising populist movement in the Americas. "Who is Javier Milei?" asked The Guardian. Describing him as the country's new far-right president, the outlet compared him to his fellow right-wing populists Donald Trump and Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro. PBS wrote that the fiery political outsider thrust the country into uncertainty about how extreme his policies would be after a campaign in which he wielded a chainsaw to symbolically slash the size of the state. The article also made the obligatory comparisons to Trump. Every new president brings uncertainty, but Milei's free market policies were certainly well known in advance. Beyond his norm-breaking rhetoric, Milei's approach starkly contrasts with Trump's. Milei pledged free market reforms to end decades of populist Peronism, a statist ideology that has plagued Argentine politics since Juan Domingo Perón became president in 1946. His authoritarian approach dominated the country's politics for 80 years until Milei defeated Peronist opponents. In contrast, Trump is upending America's historic embrace of free markets and free trade. Positioning himself as an all-powerful, charismatic leader, he deeply embeds federal intervention in the economy and expands the influence of police and armed forces. Like Perón, he does so in the name of the working class. The U.S. State Department once described Peronism as a vague concept of social justice, somewhat more like a religion than a political movement, which sounds eerily similar to MAGA. Peronism is more overtly left-wing than Trumpism, but MAGA's right-wing policies sometimes feel indistinguishable from the left. Argentina's populist movement succeeded in one thing: it turned one of the world's richest countries into abject poverty. Americans think of Argentina as a backward third-world nation, but as economist Dan Mitchell explains, it was the 10th wealthiest country in the world when Perón came to power. It was often seen as a European nation that happened to be in Latin America. Consider these figures from the Cato Institute. Milei has inherited a country suffering from over 200% inflation in 2023, 40% poverty, a fiscal and quasi-fiscal deficit of 15% of GDP, massive and growing public debt, a bankrupt central bank, and a shrinking economy. So let's see how Milei is doing and compare it to the Republican administration. According to Cato, Milei has halved the number of government agencies, laid off 37,000 public employees, and implemented 672 regulatory reforms. In America, Elon Musk has indeed walked on stage with a chainsaw.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
But his DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, has only achieved 5% of its promised savings. While Milei focused on well-thought-out, tangible cuts and reforms, the MAGA government has largely focused on public relations. DOGE was a good idea, poorly executed. Milei has effectively limited the size of Argentina's government. Under Trump, the gross federal debt of the U.S. government surpassed $37 trillion, a record milestone that underscores the rapid growth of America's financial obligations and the increasing burden on taxpayers, according to a Newsweek report. The biggest difference between these two movements lies in international trade. As a true free market advocate, Milei understands that increased trade brings prosperity, while tariffs are taxes paid by a country's consumers. The Argentine government has reduced or eliminated various trade regulations, such as licenses for importing household appliances and clothing, Buy Argentina mandates, nationalist shelf stock requirements, restrictions on commercial air transport, and strict limits on imports for personal use, said Scott Lincecum of the Cato Institute. Milei is opening Argentina's economy, while Trump is closing hours and consolidating power in his own hands, doling out restrictions and privileges. Milei makes his economy predictable, while Trump bases hours on his whims. As our president deeply intervenes in the private economy, our free markets are turning into state capitalism, a hybrid between socialism and capitalism in which the state directs the decisions of nominally private enterprises, explained Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal. He believes Trump is increasingly mirroring China's approach. On housing, another journal article noted that Milei repealed strict rent controls in the country, and as a result, the supply of rentals in Buenos Aires has increased by more than 170%, with the city seeing a 40% drop in real estate rental prices adjusted for inflation. Here, progressives are the biggest fans of this destructive housing policy, and while Trump wisely cut housing rental subsidies, he hasn't addressed this mostly local issue. However, Trump appears to oppose efforts to reduce zoning regulations that limit supply and drive up prices. By the way, Milei isn't enamored with overseas authoritarian rulers, unlike our president. Overall, Milei uses his power to loosen the government's grip, while Trump, though sometimes deregulating, centralizes state power. These two men may share bad hair and unpredictable temperaments, but beyond that, their similarities quickly fade. But here's what's important, and what we want to emphasize. This is the continuation of the saga of Trump's cosmic tariffs against China. Donald Trump is trying daily to outdo himself in economic idiocy. While most of us are still grappling with the damage he's done to the United States' reputation as a country with a stable political environment, through his intelligence leaks, the cancellation of a nearly completed wind power plant, and the firing of the Federal Reserve chairman, we may have missed his latest attempt to win the Nobel Prize for economic stupidity. Apparently, China is still restricting sales of rare earth minerals and magnets to the United States. I say apparently because this is a claim by Trump, and as we know, Donald Trump's statements have only a casual relationship with the truth. But the more interesting part of this story is Trump's threat to impose a 200% tax on goods we import from China. It seems Trump believes that a massive tax he'll impose on people importing goods from China will be even scarier than the 154% tax he threatened back in the spring. What Trump seems unable to grasp, and what his advisors can't explain to him, is that we, not China, pay the tax. Numerous studies over the years have shown that importers, retailers, or consumers pay the vast majority of taxes we impose on imported goods, not the other country. We already have enough data to say this clearly applies to Trump's latest tariffs. If other countries were paying for Trump's tariffs, import prices would be falling. They're not. They're rising at roughly the same rate as before Trump introduced his tariffs. Even in the case with China, where Trump has already imposed a 30% tax, import prices have only fallen by 2.4% over the last year, which is less than 1/10 of the size of Trump's tax. Moreover, it's unclear whether Trump's tariffs are the reason for the drop in prices of our imports from China. Import prices also fell in 2023. The country is grappling with deflation, meaning prices for many goods there were already declining before Trump introduced any tariffs. But even if Chinese exporters might be willing to absorb some of the tariff costs at current levels, that willingness will likely vanish as the tariff size increases. The reason is that Trump has made the United States a far less important export market for China. In 2010, China's exports to the United States accounted for 6.0% of its GDP. By 2024, they accounted for just 2.3% of GDP. In the first 6 months of this year, they were only 1.7%. As tariffs approach Trump's triple-digit levels, the only goods the United States will still buy from China will be those simply unavailable anywhere else. While this export is likely relatively unimportant to Chinese exporters, it is probably extremely important to businesses willing to pay these massive tariffs to buy Chinese goods. That's why, when Trump threatens to impose a 200% tariff on goods imported from China, he's threatening local businesses with extremely high taxes. He's not threatening China. Sadly, Donald Trump apparently cannot grasp this simple fact about how trade and tariffs work. Even more regrettably, top advisors like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett are too afraid of Trump to explain it to him. From China's perspective, the higher, the better. If Trump wants to bring the U.S. economy to its knees, why should President Xi stand in the way?